I want to tell you about a woman I will call Sandra. She is 65. She spent 33 years married. She raised 3 children. She taught school for 26 years. She looked after her mother through a long illness at the end of her mother's life. And 4 years ago, after her youngest left home and her marriage quietly ended, she found herself standing in her kitchen on a Tuesday morning with a cup of tea and nothing that needed doing. And she felt something she did not expect to feel, terrified. Not of being alone, not of what came next, practically speaking. She was financially stable. She had her health. She had people who loved her. What terrified her was a question so simple it had no right to be as difficult as it was. The question was, what do you actually want? She told me later that she stood there for a long time, and she realized for the first time in her adult life that she had no idea how to answer that question. She had spent 40 years answering a different question entirely. A question that began not with what do you want, but with what does everyone need? I want to talk about that today because Sandra is not unusual. I have met a great many women who arrive at 60 or 65 or 70 at some point of relative freedom after the children are grown and the marriage is over and the job is done, and discover that freedom, when it finally arrives, feels less like relief and more like standing at the edge of something they do not know how to cross. I want to talk about where that feeling comes from, what it costs, and what finding your way across actually looks like. Because I have seen women do it, and it is one of the most extraordinary things I have ever watched. The first thing I want to say is this. What Sandra had been doing for 40 years was not weakness. It was not passivity. It was not a failure of self-knowledge. It was a habit so deeply embedded she could not see it as a habit. It felt like character. It felt like who she was. When Sandra was growing up, the message she absorbed, not from one conversation, but from 1,000 small moments over many years, was that a good woman makes things easier for the people around her, that her value was in her usefulness. That love was expressed through service, that putting yourself first was not something women like her did. She did not choose that belief system. She absorbed it. And then she spent 4 decades living it out so consistently and so completely that it became invisible to her. It was simply the water she swam in. This is important to say clearly. She was good at it. She was genuinely gifted at caring for people, at anticipating what they needed, at holding things together when things threatened to fall apart. Her students loved her. Her children felt safe. Her mother's last years were full of dignity and warmth. None of that was nothing. None of it was wasted. That capacity for care was real and it mattered. But there was a cost. And the cost was not something she could name while she was in it. The cost was that she had never once asked herself, seriously and with full permission, what she actually wanted. Not as a small indulgence, not as a guilty break from the main business of her life, but as the actual question, the central question. What do you want your life to be? She had never answered that. She had not been allowed to, by the belief system she had inherited and never questioned. And so at 65, when the busyness that had structured her life for 4 decades fell away, she found herself with no answer ready, with no self that she knew how to speak for. The second thing I want to say is about what comes up when the busyness falls away, because it is not emptiness. People expect emptiness, and what they find is more complicated. What Sandra found was a kind of low-level anxiety she could not explain. a restlessness that had nowhere to go, a guilt that made no sense given the circumstances. She had nothing left to feel guilty about, no one who needed her in the urgent way they once had, and yet the guilt was there. A persistent sense that she should be doing something. That being still was wrong. She also noticed that she did not know how to be still. She had been useful for so long that doing nothing felt like a kind of failure. Even rest had to be earned. Even an afternoon to herself had to be justified. She would find tasks to fill the space. She would clean things that were already clean. She would say yes to requests she did not want to fulfill, because saying yes was familiar and saying no required a self she had not yet learned to speak from. She also found something else. Underneath the anxiety, when she was quiet enough to feel it, was grief. Not grief for the marriage, particularly, or for the career that was over. Grief for a version of herself she had never managed to be. For all the years she had asked the question, what do everyone need, before she had asked, what do I want? For the version of herself who had wanted things, who had been curious, particular, alive to her own desires, and who had been slowly, gently, without any malice, trained out of that. She said, I did not know I was grieving for myself. I thought grief was for other people. I did not understand you could grieve for a version of yourself you had never managed to become. That is one of the most important things I have ever heard a woman say to me. The third thing I want to say is about what finding your way actually looks like. Sandra did not have a revelation. She did not wake up one morning knowing exactly who she was and what she wanted. It did not work like that for her. And in my experience, it rarely does. What she did was smaller than that. She started very deliberately asking herself a question every morning. Not the big question that was too large, too unfamiliar, too frightening. The small question. The question was, what do I feel like today? Not what should I do, not what needs doing. What do I feel like? Some mornings the answer was nothing. Some mornings it was that she wanted to walk. Some mornings it was that she wanted to call someone she had not spoken to in years. A woman she had been close to before the years of busyness had made that friendship quietly impossible to maintain. Some mornings it was that she wanted to sit in her garden without any purpose at all and simply be in it. She started following those small answers. She started treating them as worth following. She said, it sounds like nothing. It sounds like the smallest thing. But I had spent 40 years overriding those answers before I had even registered them. I had spent 40 years saying not now or later or after, and there was always something to say that for. She also did something else that I think is important. She told people, not everyone, but the women she was close to, the 2 or 3 who mattered most to her. She told them what she had realized, that she had not known how to answer the question, that she was trying to learn, that she might sometimes need to say no to things she would previously have said yes to, not because she did not care about them, but because she was practicing a different way of living. She said the women who loved her did not think less of her for telling them that. They recognized it. Most of them said some version of, I know exactly what you mean. I want to say one more thing about time, because some women hear this and feel the sting of the years. They think, if I had understood this at 45, what might I have done differently? And I understand that sting. I have felt something like it myself. But I want to offer something alongside it. Sandra found something at 65 that most women never find at any age. She found herself, not quickly and not all at once, but she found the thread that led back to who she was before she had been taught to be useful above all else. She followed it carefully, slowly, with a great deal of stumbling, and also with a growing sense of something she had not felt in many years. She called it rightness, not happiness exactly, not excitement, rightness, the feeling of being for the first time in a very long time in her own life rather than alongside it. She is still finding her way. She will probably keep finding it for the rest of her life, which I think is not a small thing, but a very good one. I want to say something to you directly, if this is landing. You are not behind. You have not missed your turn. Your turn was not a window that opened and closed without you. It is here, now, in whatever version of this that applies to you. The question, what do I actually want, does not expire. It is still available to you. It is, I would say, always available to you. You do not have to answer it all at once. Start with a small version. Start with, what do I feel like today? And then see what happens when you follow that answer, even a little, even imperfectly, even with the guilt still there, because the guilt does not go immediately, but it does over time begin to loosen. That is how it started for Sandra, and it was enough. My name is Patricia Hayes. This is Patricia's Porch, where I believe that honest conversations about the real shape of a life are the most useful ones we can have. If this reached you today, I hope you will share it with someone who needs to hear it. And please subscribe below. I am here every week, and I would love to keep this conversation going with you. Thank you for sitting with me. I will see you next time.